This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. You can subscribe to the Piano Maven podcast by going to the link on my Substack page, and I've provided a link in today's episode description. We've been talking lately about box sets that I would love to see released, either box sets that we really need, or box sets that we want rather than need, or box sets that only a handful of piano crazies like myself would have any interest in buying. But today, I'm going to talk about 4 piano box sets that I happen to find quite interesting and that I feel deserve to be reissued. These are not easy to source in physical format, that's for sure, but I do have them in my collection and they certainly are ripe for reissue. So let's start with the first one. This features the Polish composer and pianist Milos Magin, who lived from 1929 until 1999, and it consists of 10 CDs that contain all of the recordings of Chopin's music that he made for the French branch of the Decca label. I first heard these recordings many years ago. I heard the Etudes and I heard the Preludes Opus 28, and I thought they were such stimulating and original interpretations. And it was only after that I realized that Milos Magin had recorded much more Chopin for Decca. And like pianists who are primarily composers, Milos Magin tends to give special emphasis to bass lines, and he also underlines Chopin's extraordinary harmonic ideas, but in a way where it's not blatant or overly obvious. Universal Classics Accord label in France brought out a 10-disc set that encompasses all of the Milos Magin Chopin recordings. It came out in a box. Now, he did not record the complete Chopin, but he did quite a lot. I was really taken with his polonaises, for example. They have great thrust and rhythmic swagger and emotional intensity. The concertos are very good, although they're not my tip-top recommendations. The nocturnes are rather close to that angular style that characterizes Arthur Rubinstein's late 40s, early 50s nocturne cycle. We have the 14 standard waltzes, the berceuse, the barcarolle, the fantasy, and the bolero, and some little sniglets like the largo and the equusise and the funeral march. We have readings of the 4 ballades, and I already spoke about the polonaises. All the standard ones are here, but curiously, he didn't record the Polonaise Fantasy. I'm sorry he did not. But we do have all 3 sonatas, including the first sonata that no one cares about, and the Etudes, like I said. The 3 rondos are here, the Opus 1, Opus 5, and Opus 16, and there are 44 of the mazurkas. And Milos Magin really understands the mazurka idiom. He brings out all of Chopin's sophisticated harmonic wizardry, but he's not afraid to get down and dirty as well when the music calls for it. So I would love to see this 10-disc collection of Milos Magin playing Chopin gain a new lease on catalog life. My next box set that is ripe for reissue is a Mozart piano concerto cycle that no one ever talks about. I reviewed it fairly recently for ClassicsToday.com, and I wager that few Western collectors in the 1970s even knew about it. It features the piano soloist Rosa Schmidt, who lived from 1936 until 2022, and it's conducted by Kurt Masur. He's leading the Dresdner Philharmonie. And these recordings originally were issued on LP by the East German Eterna label. They were recorded between 1972 and 1978, if I'm not mistaken, appearing more or less in tandem with their contemporaneous Marie Pariah and Alfred Brendel editions, which, of course, Western collectors knew much more about. And the sonics are a little reverberant and they turn kind of diffuse and loud tooties, and there really isn't a lot of bottom to the sonics. But I like the performances, and I feel that the salient virtues of Kurt Mazur's conducting are clearly audible, such as his unerring tempo choices and the sweetly singing yet never cloying Dresden strings, and the woodwinds have real characterful bite. It kind of reminds me of the Czech Philharmonic of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And for her part, Rosa Schmidt proves that she's just as stylish and enlivening a Mozart pianist as any of her other better-known colleagues. She has a pearly legato that's very attractive, and it allows for subtle variations in articulation, while shapely and vibrant interaction between both of her hands consistently points up the music's harmonic felicities and dramatic inferences. Some really good examples of what I mean are to be found in the E-flat Concerto, Koelschel 449, in the finale. The contrapuntal clarity at the outset is very impressive. And we have a really joyful and ebullient recording of that underrated D major concerto, Koelschel 451. I don't know why this concerto doesn't get the attention that others get. I mean, this is a wonderful work. And the G major concerto, the Koelschel 453 third movement theme and variations, feature some really inspired and witty interplay between the soloist and ensemble. Now, maybe the minor key concertos, the D minor Koelschel 466 and C minor 491, come off sounding relatively lightweight next to darker and fuller-throated versions. I'm thinking of the Alfred Brendel and Charles Mackerras remakes with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. But on the other hand, the big symphonically scaled E-flat concerto, Koelschel 482, benefits from lean textures and animated tempi in the outer movements. So altogether, I think this is a sleeper of a Mozart cycle, and it's definitely ripe for a reissue. The third box set I'd like to talk about features the French pianist France Clidat. She lived from 1932 until 2012. She recorded an extensive survey of Franz Liszt's original solo piano compositions for the French Vega label, whose catalog is controlled by Universal Classics. She did not set down the many transcriptions of Liszt in this series, nor did she include works based on other people's themes, like, for example, the Bach Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Sagen, or the Prelude and Fugue on BACH, that's also an organ work. The recordings in this box mainly concern original works, totally original works. Anyway, Decca brought out all of these recordings in a 14-disc box set back in 2010. The recordings date from the late 60s through the early 1970s. Essentially, France Clidat was a big technician and a big Liszt stylist, but she also had a classical streak and a sense of reserve to her playing. I generally think that her interpretations hold their own with all great Liszt players, and they deserve to be more widely available. So, on these 14 CDs, you get a lot of music: the complete Année de Pèlerinage, the 2 Legends, the 6 Consolations, the 2 Ballades, the 19 Hungarian Rhapsodies, the Spanish Rhapsody, the Harmonie Poétique et Religieuse, the Transcendental Etudes, the B minor Sonata, of course, all of the late pieces, and a lot of small pieces too. So there's a lot to savor here. This is definitely a box that's ripe for reissue. And my fourth box that's ripe for reissue features another French pianist, whom I like to talk about, Raymond Trouard. And he lived from 1916 until 2008, when he passed away at the age of 92. His career took off in the late 1930s, and he became quite highly regarded, not just as a performer, but also as a teacher. He made a good number of recordings for various labels, primarily for Odeon in France, and also for the French branches of CBS and EMI. I had first heard about Raymond Trouard through a record collector friend of mine, the late Philip Stern, who had a penchant for discovering rare records. And although he wasn't a trained musician, Phil had big ears. And I remember that he played excerpts for me from Raymond Trouard's recording of the Liszt Sonata, which he said is the greatest one ever made. Now, I don't know if I would agree with that, but it was a really, really impressive recording. And when the French branch of Sony Classical brought out a commemorative 11 CD set in tribute to Raymond Trouard, it included that recording of the Liszt Sonata, and it was every bit as wonderful as I had remembered. And also pretty wonderful are his recordings of the two Liszt concertos that are in this box. Basically, Sony Classical drew from a number of sources to put the set together. And sometimes the sonics are dry and not very attractive, and sometimes you can say the same about Trouard's pianism, but there's a lot of good stuff in this collection. In addition to the list, such as Schubert waltzes, there's an excellent Haydn F major sonata, there are first-rate recordings of the Grieg and Tchaikovsky concertos, there are 24 Chopin mazurkas, there's a lot more Liszt, all of the Chopin waltzes are here, the three so-called name Beethoven sonatas, the Moonlight Pathétique and Appassionata, and also the Pastoral Sonata. And there's a lot more Raymond Trouard out there in discography land beyond these 11 CDs. So maybe one day some record company will corral the entirety of the Raymond Trouard discography together and shove it all in a big box. Is that going to happen in my lifetime? I doubt it. But at least this 11 CD set from French Sony Classical called Raymond Trouard, Une vie pour le piano, A Life for the Piano, is definitely a worthwhile candidate for reissue. So here we have 4 piano box sets that are ripe for reissue, and hopefully in our lifetime, because you can't buy them or listen to them when you're dead. Well, maybe I shouldn't assume that, if I die and go to heaven, does the St. Peter Piano Library have all of these box sets? Probably so. But if I am sent the opposite route, which could well happen, I am sure I will be forced to listen to the Pachelbel canon 24 hours a day for eternity. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Thank you for tuning in. And are there any box sets that are ripe for reissue that you would like to draw attention to? Please let me know. I'd like to know what you think. Take good care.